My daughter-in-law texted me at 6 in the morning. This year, we're keeping the family reunion really small, just the immediate circle. That meant without me. I didn't argue. I didn't call her back. I just went out and bought another house and quietly stopped every bit of support I'd been giving them. 2 weeks later, she showed up at my door with a professional appraiser, but what she never expected was that I had already prepared for this moment. Martha, we've decided to keep this year's family get-together small, just the inner circle. That message from my daughter-in-law, Brooke, landed on my phone at 6:47 a.m. while I sat in the kitchen of our house in a quiet Seattle neighborhood, staring at my first cup of coffee that had already gone cold. In her language, inner circle simply meant no me. I was the widow who had paid for the entire house where Brooke and my son Ryan had been living rent-free for 3 years. And suddenly, I wasn't part of the family anymore. I didn't feel pain so much as this strange, almost sharp clarity. It was the final proof of what I'd been noticing for months. I had slowly been turned into an unpaid extra in my own life. Ryan hadn't even texted me himself. He never did when Brooke drew her lines. She came from a family where control was the most important thing. Ever since they moved in, she had quietly taken over. First, it was the flower beds she didn't like. Then the Sunday dinner menus, and finally, my living room was too old-fashioned for their child's development. They treated me like a roommate they put up with as long as I paid the bills, folded the laundry, and babysat whenever they wanted a night out. But Brooke had made one crucial mistake. She mistook my quiet nature for weakness and my silence for naivety. I set the mug down. A decision hardened inside me. I wasn't going to fight cry or beg Ryan for an invitation. While they were probably still asleep upstairs dreaming about their exclusive little weekend, I pulled an old notebook from the kitchen drawer. It didn't contain feelings, just cold numbers, repair costs, property taxes, and all the monthly help money I'd been sending Ryan. It was more than enough. I opened a real estate site and looked at a little brick cottage I'd had my eye on for a long time, a peaceful place up in the Cascade foothills, a home where I would make the rules. The plan was set. The realtor sounded surprised by how decisive I was. "Mrs. Harper, wouldn't you like to see the cottage first?" he asked with that careful Pacific Northwest tone. I answered simply, "I know these old homes well enough. Send me the purchase agreement." I had a separate savings account that Ryan and Brooke knew nothing about money my late husband had set aside for my retirement away from the house. Brooke believed all my money was tied up in the Seattle property. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. Mornings, I still made the usual organic oatmeal for my grandson. Afternoons, I quietly sorted my important documents and the few personal things that truly mattered. During that time, Brooke became almost unbearable in her condescension. She thought I had swallowed the exclusion from the family reunion without complaint, just like I had swallowed everything else. One evening, she said casually while scrolling her phone, "Martha, could you watch the little one next weekend? We need time to organize the reunion at the hotel." I set my fork down, gently, looked her straight in the eyes, and said, in a voice that left no room for argument, "No, Brooke. I have my own plans that weekend." Ryan lifted his head from his plate, clearly thrown by my tone. Brooke let out a short, artificial laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Your own plans. Since when do your plans matter more than family?" I didn't answer directly. I just cleared my plate and loaded the dishwasher. That arrogance in her voice was the last piece of proof I needed. That night, I canceled the automatic grocery payment for the household. If I wasn't part of the inner circle, there was no reason to keep feeding it. When Brooke asked the next day why the fridge was empty, I simply said, "I'm getting ready for my weekend. I'm sure you can handle your own groceries." As the reunion weekend drew closer, the atmosphere in the house grew colder. Brooke tried several times to pull me into conversations about my mysterious plans, but I stayed vague and polite. I had become a master of precision. I did exactly what was necessary and not 1 ounce more. While they loaded the car with expensive suitcases for their private weekend, I quietly arranged my own departure. I had booked a small, discreet moving crew for Monday morning. I wanted no big scene, no yelling, and especially no empty promises from Ryan that he wouldn't keep. I wanted facts that couldn't be undone. When they finally drove off Friday afternoon, I gave a quick wave. Brooke looked triumphant. She thought she had successfully erased me from the family picture and could now treat the house like her own little kingdom for a few days. The moment their car disappeared around the corner, I got to work. I didn't take everything, only the things that had soul. The expensive designer furniture I had bought for their floor stayed behind. The house shouldn't look looted. It should just feel different. I left a straightforward note on the big kitchen table, no accusations, written in clear handwriting on good paper. It informed them that I was preparing the Seattle house for sale. Since it was legally in my name, only I had every right. I gave them a generous 3 months to find new housing or arrange financing at current market value without the usual mom discount. By Monday afternoon, I was already sitting in the modest garden of my new cottage in the Cascade foothills. It was so quiet, you could hear the bees humming. No arguments about modern decor, no condescending comments about my supposedly old-fashioned views. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt like the captain of my own life. But the real test was still to come. Ryan called a total of 8 times before I finally picked up on Wednesday morning. He didn't sound worried. He sounded angry, almost hysterical. "Mom, what does this letter mean?" "You're selling the house. Where are you? We thought you were staying with a friend." In the background, I could hear Brooke's shrill voice whispering instructions to him. I stayed completely calm, took a sip of tea, and looked out at the wide mountain view. "I'm in a place that belongs to me, Ryan. Since I'm no longer in the inner circle, I've decided to arrange my assets so they give me security in my old age instead of quietly supporting others." He stammered something about family values and moral responsibility. I interrupted him gently but firmly. "Responsibility isn't a one-way street, son. You wanted space away from my old furniture and my advice. Now you have it completely." I hung up before the conversation could slide into the usual insults Brooke always used when she didn't get her way. Shortly afterward, I received a very long message from her. She wrote that they would never accept this, that they had a right to stay, and that my behavior seemed mentally unstable. She was trying to intimidate me the same way she had for years, but I had done my homework. Property rights are very clear when there's no written lease, and I had paid every single expense from taxes to insurance out of my own pocket. I had checked everything quietly at the county office. I was the sole owner. They were legally just guests. Meanwhile, I was settling into life in the foothills. I bought local specialties at the little country store and got to know my neighbor, Mrs. Callahan. It was an honest life. Then, my security camera at the Seattle house alerted me to unauthorized movement at the front door. I opened the app on my tablet and watched the live feed. What I saw nearly took my breath away, even though I had expected trouble. Brooke stood at my front door, flanked by a man in an expensive gray suit, holding a clipboard and a laser measurer. They didn't even try to ask permission. They behaved as if the property already belonged to them. Brooke gestured dramatically at the facade and windows. They had actually brought a private appraiser to value the house, probably to convince Ryan they could claim a large share or to impress a bank. Brooke pulled out a key, my old spare that I had kept in the kitchen cabinet, and tried to open the heavy oak door. I watched her twist it forcefully, but the door didn't move an inch. Before I left, I had installed a special security deadbolt that could only be released with a hidden code, or from the inside. Brooke grew more and more frustrated, yanking aggressively on the handle, while the appraiser impatiently checked his watch. It was an undignified spectacle. They wanted to appraise my property without asking me. I picked up the phone and dialed Brooke directly. On the screen, I saw her flinch when her phone vibrated in her expensive handbag. She answered, trying to switch to her reasonable voice. "Martha, where are you?" "We're at the door, the key seems stuck." I answered with icy calm. "Brooke, I'm watching you on the camera right now. I assume the gentleman with you is an appraiser. I never gave you permission to bring strangers into my house or have it valued. Leave the property immediately." There was an awkward silence followed by a flood of justifications. I simply ended the call. They had finally crossed the line for good. After Brooke and the appraiser left, I sent Ryan a certified letter with a detailed list of the monthly operating costs for the Seattle house. I listed everything carefully: insurance, property taxes, trash fees, utility prepayments, water, electricity, and the necessary reserve for roof maintenance. I had quietly paid all of these from my pension and savings, while they spent their money on expensive vacations and designer clothes. I added one short sentence. "Starting next month, these costs will be split in half. Since you are now living in the house alone, this is the minimum contribution I expect." The reaction came quickly and sounded more desperate than aggressive. Ryan called, and this time he sounded like the little boy he still was deep down. "Mom, we can't possibly afford that. Brooke's part-time job barely covers private preschool, and my salary as a junior consultant isn't meant for a house this size." I listened patiently while I pulled weeds in my garden. When he finished, I said, "Ryan, I'm almost 70 years old. I worked for decades to pay off this house debt-free. It was meant to be my security, not a free residence for you while you treat me like an annoying piece of furniture." He tried emotional blackmail next. "What about your grandson? Do you really want him to lose his familiar home?" That's cruel. My heart tightened for a moment, but I stayed firm. "My grandson will visit me in the mountains. There's real woods, fresh air, and a grandma who has time for him because I won't be running your household anymore just to feel useful." Ryan went silent on the other end. I sensed that for the first time in his life, he understood that money doesn't just appear, and that my generosity had been a gift, not a natural law. Brooke had kept him in a bubble of security that was now bursting. 2 weeks later, something happened that I hadn't quite expected in this form. A small silver rental car pulled into my narrow driveway. It wasn't Ryan. Brooke stepped out alone. She looked exhausted. Her usually perfect makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. I stood on my little porch and watched her silently as she walked toward me. The familiar arrogance was gone. "Martha," she said quietly, almost shyly. I didn't invite her inside. I just pointed to the 2 simple wooden chairs in the garden. "What brings you here, Brooke?" I asked directly. She started talking a strange mix of apology and weak excuses. She spoke about the huge pressure at her job, her desire to make everything perfect, and her fear that I would interfere too much in raising the little one. She claimed they had needed space as a couple to survive. I let her finish without interrupting. Then I said calmly, "Needing space is completely legitimate, Brooke. But you don't create that space by pushing the person who paid for everything into a corner. You excluded me from the family while living off my savings. That's not being overwhelmed. That's poor character." She began to cry softly, but I remained unmoved. I had seen too many tears in my life that were only meant to avoid consequences. "What do you really want here?" I asked again. Finally, she got to the point they couldn't find any apartment in Seattle that was even close to as nice and affordable as my house. She asked me to stop the sale and return to the old arrangement. I looked at her and saw a woman feeling the cold wall of reality for the first time. "I will not stop the sale," I said firmly. "But I will give you official first right of refusal at a fair market price. If you want the house, you will have to finance it yourselves. I'm not your bank anymore." Brooke left the foothills with a neat stack of documents. I had carefully prepared contact information for a reputable financial advisor and an official appraisal of the house. No threats, just facts. In the following weeks, the dynamic between us changed dramatically. Ryan started calling regularly, and to my surprise, he actually asked how I was doing instead of just making demands. He even came up alone one sunny Saturday to help me paint the old shutters. We didn't talk much about the past, but his presence and the physical work on my new home felt like a quiet peace offering. Over lunch, he told me they had actually gone to the financial advisor. It had been a painful process for them to realize they had been living beyond their means for years just to keep up appearances. The big Seattle house was simply too expensive for a young family with 1.5 incomes once you honestly factored in maintenance. "Maybe we bit off more than we could chew, Mom," he admitted for the first time while stirring his coffee. I just nodded. It was a bitter realization for him, but a necessary one for him to grow into a real adult. In the meantime, I settled deeper into life in the foothills. I built a small raised garden bed and pruned old fruit trees that had been neglected for years. The quiet of nature did my soul endless good. I realized that in Seattle, I had mostly been living out of a sense of duty. The tightness of the city and Brooke's constant subtle control had been making me sick inside. Here I was, simply Martha Harper, a woman taking care of her own home and watching the sunset over the hills with a glass of wine in the evening. I no longer needed a big family reunion to feel valuable. I had rediscovered my own worth. Late that fall, the three of us met at a neutral cafe near the water in Seattle. Brooke seemed changed, humbler, less controlling, and somehow more grounded. Ryan placed an official document on the table. After a lot of back and forth, they had decided not to buy the Seattle house. "Honestly, it's too much for us if we're being realistic with ourselves," he said, with a new maturity in his voice. "We found a nice 3-bedroom apartment closer to Brooke's parents. It's modern, smaller, but we can afford it on our own without burdening you." I felt an enormous weight lift from my shoulders. "I think that's a very smart and courageous decision," I said, and I meant it with all my heart. We agreed on a fair timeline for them to move out of the house. I offered to help with the move, not financially, but with advice, physical help, and packing boxes. Brooke looked at me for a long time and finally said, "Martha, I'm truly sorry. I thought I had to push you aside to find my own place in the family. I didn't understand that you were the foundation we were standing on all along." It wasn't a dramatic breakdown, just an honest admission. I accepted it without comment. The sale of the Seattle house went smoothly after that. There were many young couples looking for exactly that kind of property, and I got a price that more than secured my retirement. I put part of the proceeds into a long-term savings plan for my grandson, but under my sole control. I wanted to make sure he would get the best education later without the money being spent on new cars or short-lived luxuries for his parents. I had learned that love and finances must stay strictly separate if a family is to remain healthy. Handing over the keys to the new owners was an emotional moment, but I felt liberated. Today, I sit on my porch watching the first light frost sparkle on the meadows. Inside my little brick cottage, it's cozy and warm. The cast-iron wood stove crackles softly in the background. Next week, Ryan, Brooke, and my little grandson are coming to visit. Not because they have to, or because they need something from me, but because I invited them. There are now clear, unspoken rules. They stay at the small inn in the village, and we spend the day together in the woods or the garden. Everyone has their own space, and everyone respects the other's boundaries. Brooke has stopped criticizing my decor, and I have stopped justifying my existence. We have found a healthy distance that actually makes real closeness possible again. Sometimes I think back to that message on that cold morning, just the immediate circle. Brooke had been right back then, but in a way she herself didn't understand. The tightest circle always begins with yourself. If you don't respect yourself and protect your own boundaries with actions, no one else will. I didn't waste any fortune, and I didn't need an army of lawyers to claim what was mine. I simply stopped subsidizing other people's mistakes and stopped denying my own needs. My life is simpler now, but infinitely richer in real contentment. I've made new friends in the village, I volunteer at the little local library, and I enjoy my independence to the fullest. Ryan and I have found a new foundation, adult, respectful, and free of the old dependencies. He no longer sees me only as the provider, but as a woman who is living her own life. And Brooke, she has learned that respect is the basis for any invitation. I look out over the wide horizon of the Cascade foothills and know deep inside I have finally come home. This house and this new life have only one name on the deed mine. Watch until the end and tell me, what would you have done in my place?